So I want to begin with a question. There will be a need to show hands. So I just want to know, who has ever caught a train, ridden on a bus, gone by car, or flown anywhere? Okay, fairly conclusive. Good. That makes the whole of this work. With their hands over this side? Okay. No. Just walked here. So you'll understand the journey. You'll understand that we often will use modes of transport to get somewhere. They are part of an ongoing journey that we take. Now, I'm willing to bet that there will be a few here who fall into the minority, but for a majority of us, the journey is not the final part of the destination. We are going somewhere to do something. There may be those of you who like to jump in your car, drive to Cardiff, and then sit in John Lewis car park with no phone signal, and then drive home. There may be those of you who fly to an airport only to turn around, check your bags back in, and fly back the other way. There is definitely going to be at least one person that's done that, if not deliberately by accident. But the truth is that we fly, travel, go by train to get somewhere, to get off and to go somewhere. People okay with that as a general idea? I'm sure there are those of you, my parents included, that ride trains because it's fun and end up back where they started. But generally, we get on a mode of transport to go somewhere, and then we go beyond where we've arrived to experience the place. We don't just simply stop at the barrier or turn around and drive back. We understand there is more to it. We're going somewhere. Maybe we're going to visit family. Maybe we're going on holiday abroad. Maybe we're doing our Christmas shopping in Cardiff. We are going somewhere to go on and do something else. The journey is a part of what we are doing. It wouldn't make sense for us to go by these modes of transport and stop there. It wouldn't make sense for us to travel, to make that effort, and then go no further. And yet, if we're honest with ourselves, for many of us, that's part of how our Christian walk can become. For many of us, we've got to a point, and we've not necessarily travelled beyond that point. We have jumped, and forgive the metaphor, but we've jumped on a train to salvation, and we've arrived at the barrier, and we've not gone any further. We've got that far, and yet we've not embraced any further. Please hear me, I'm not for a minute suggesting this is everyone. I am acutely aware there are seasons that we go through in our lives that will have an effect on how we live out our faith. But generally, for many of us, there will have been times, and maybe they're more frequent than we like to admit, where we found ourselves on this incredible, amazing journey of salvation, but it's not necessarily gone much further. It's not gone much further than knowing that we are saved. Those of you that have spent enough time around me will have heard this language before, but I'm obviously talking about that call on our lives to be a disciple. To be a disciple of Christ. To be followers of Jesus, not stood stillers. I made that word up. And please hear me, in no way am I suggesting anything about anyone's salvation. And in no way am I stood here in a position of judgment. But if the way I have lived my life is anything like the way you've lived yours, there will be seasons where you have got to the barrier and you know you are saved and you have stood still. And you've stood still. And sometimes that's because the situation around you is hard, and sometimes it's because you feel lost, and sometimes it's because there's not a good leader in front of you. There's many reasons for it, but you found yourself in that place where the idea of being a disciple is a challenge too far. I can be saved, I can love Jesus, but the following is hard. Discipleship, a word that often comes along with other words such as accountability and disciplines. But what does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? What does it mean to be a disciple of Jesus? Because I see that amazing passage, I've come to give life and life to the fullest, and there's days in my life where I have life, but I don't know if I've experienced the fullest part. I don't know if I've walked into that fullness So if you'd humour me back at our train station, I've taken this incredible journey. I have discovered something more of life through a relationship with Jesus, but then I find myself at this point with a decision to make. Do I sit comfortable in knowing I am saved, or do I become a follower? Do I go beyond that first part of the journey? Do I embrace the more that is to come? There is a fullness to be found in discipleship and in those challenges. But before I dive into some scripture, I just want to continue to paint this picture because I think it's important. It's important for us to understand. So I want you to picture a tree, to consider the wonders of its branches and its leaves, the way the seasons affect it. It's strong enough to put a rope swing in for children, shelter from the rain when we're out on a walk, home to nesting birds, and all held up and supported by its roots, drawing sustenance from the ground, strengthening the tree. Unseen, unwavering, deeply woven, spread out wide all around the tree. Without the tree, there is no need for the roots. Without the roots, there is no tree. It is crucial that there is an unseen part of the tree functioning to allow it to live and thrive and grow and develop and be everything it is to the natural world around it. Similar to our own lives, we need to be aware there are parts of our lives that do not need to be publicly displayed in our walk with Jesus. Humble disciplines. I found this out looking at trees. Someone in here is probably going to know more about trees and correct me on this. But around 20% of the tree is actually underground. 20% of it is unseen, just doing its thing. I find that incredible. That is a huge percentage of the tree that is not on show. It is just simply there to make sure the tree is sustained and endures. Many of the subtle arts of discipleship, are those that are unseen, outside of the public eye. But I want to look this morning, not so much at those disciplines, we'll get into those, but some of those outworkings that are visible. Some of those challenges that Jesus lays before us that do result in us needing to act. Before I do that, I just want us to remember, Jesus very rarely simply referred to those around him as saved. He referred to them as disciples. There was something more in this following Jesus. It wasn't just signing up and joining a club. It was being a follower. It was taking steps. It was living out something. To be a disciple is an incredible thing, but it is a challenge. Oh, we've got the roots. We read this in John 13. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have loved one another. It's not just arriving, it is living something out. Again, Jesus says it like this in John 8:31-32. To the Jews who believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. A new command I give to you, love one another. If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Two incredible passages. Two passages that don't leave a huge amount of room to simply just sit still. Two passages that call on something more than just saying, I believe in Jesus, but saying to us there is something to do with that truth. Dare I say, the fullest part of life is when we walk that walk. Passages that draw on this idea of to love, to copy, to be visible, to obey and to follow teachings, to embrace truth. In those two verses we see so many components, but two that I think are crucial. The first is this. To be a disciple of Jesus, we need to be people of love. Jesus is incredibly clear. A new command I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. And in that second passage, to the Jews who had believed him, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. If you hold to them, not just know them, but hold to them. A few people that did Croeso with us will have seen this clip by Francis Chan, but it makes a wonderful point. And so we're just going to watch it again this morning, just to help us understand a little bit of the challenges we face as disciples.
When I was a kid, we used to play this game called Simon Says. Right? Most of us have played that, unless you're really young, because there's no app for it. Simon Says is, Simon says, pat your head, so, okay, Simon said it. It was a very simple game, but it's so weird how in the church, Jesus says is a totally different game. If Jesus says something, you don't have to do it, you just have to memorize it. You study it, you memorize. You guys, it doesn't make any sense. A lot of the things we do. When he tells us to go out and make disciples, and how many people in our churches are actually making disciples? They memorized it. When I tell my daughter, hey Rach, go clean your room. She doesn't come back to me 2 hours later and go, I memorized what you said. You said, Rach, go clean your room. I can say it in Greek. My friends are going to come over and we're going to have a study on what it would look like if I cleaned my room. She knows better than that. And so why do we think we're going to come before the judge one day and quote everything that he said? Talk about how much we know. But it's just this black and white stuff. If I just started with Scripture, I'd go, here's what I would do. I would start making disciples.
It's a challenge. Please hear me. I am not saying that study is not important. Prayer is not important. None of this is degrading or devaluing anything else, but it is raising that understanding. And I grew up in churches where we were taught to memorize things, not necessarily to live them. And dare I say, it was easier to memorize them, and I've not got a great memory, than it was to live them. There has to be more to this faith than simply knowing lots, and there has to be more than just arriving at the destination of salvation when there is a life to be lived and a life lived to the fullest. That love and that holding to teaching that we hear are not nouns, they are verbs. Love is not a noun, it's not an object, it is an action. To learn, to hold on to those teachings of Christ is more than just head knowledge, it is heart knowledge and it is action. It is to be more than simply to know. As Chan says, we aren't called to study it till we know it off by heart. We are called to do it. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples if you love one another. We are called, whether we like it or not, as followers of Jesus, to love one another. Through the good times and the bad times, when it's easy and when it's hard, when we don't want to and when we want to, when we get something from it and when we don't get something from it. We are called to love one another so that the world will know we are his disciples. So the world will know we are his disciples. Jesus lays it out for us. How will we be distinctive in this world? The way we love. The way we choose to be with one another will speak volumes into this world. By love, by the way you love each other. That is how the world will know you are my disciples. That's how the world will know there is something different about you. That is how they will know you are my followers. Not by how many books you've read, not by how many events you attend, but by how you speak to one another. That's what the world's looking at. How do we speak to each other? How do we speak of each other? How do we talk about one another in front of others? How do we support each other in the hard times? How do we celebrate in the good times? How do we visit one another? How do we host each other? How do we give? How do we receive? How do we embrace? How do we respect? The way that we are with one another is the view the world has of us. And Jesus calls us to action, to love one another. To follow involves doing. To follow involves doing. A new command I give you, love one another. I would take bets on, and I don't do that, but I would take bets on the fact that if I were to ask you what is the needs of those that live around you, you would say to know they are loved, to be shown love, to be given something. There would be a need for an action because a hurting world needs love. Gareth's prayer touched on it. We have a world torn apart by war and pride, and yet we see here Jesus telling us, set yourselves apart by loving one another. But Tim, I'm an introvert. Love one another. Tim, I don't have much money. Love one another. Tim, I really cannot be bothered to go out in the rain. Love one another. We can come up with so many excuses, and yet we see Jesus saying to us here, by loving one another, this is how they will know you are my followers. This idea of going beyond the barrier, walking through the barrier. As I was reading this passage, and it's an incredibly short passage, but an incredibly challenging one, I couldn't help but begin to think of that passage that we always hear at weddings. And you'll know what I mean if you've been to a wedding any time in the last couple of years. It's very small, but I'm going to read it out, so don't worry. 1 Corinthians 13, 4-8. Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast. It is not proud, it does not dishonor others. It is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. Where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. How can we love one another as Christ did? Well, we can be more patient. We can be more patient with one another. An expression of love. How can I follow Jesus as his disciple? Well, I need to not envy what others have. And I need to not be proud about what I have that others don't. That's how I can show love. How will people know I'm a disciple of Christ if I don't yell about it all the time? Jesus tells me that if I protect others, if I trust others, if I hope, and in the face of adversity, keep on hoping, keep on protecting, and keep on trusting, then people will know through that love that I'm his disciple. I grew up in church, and my gosh, did church make following Jesus so much harder than it needed to be. So much harder. I served on teams 6 nights a week, had to be in church early, we memorized memory verses for sweets, we had to wear certain outfits, we had to say the right prayers, I always had to have a Bible on me, I needed to make sure I stood up in worship, avoided sinful places, and was not allowed to go shopping on Sundays. Not once can I massively recall being told all the things I could do. It was like following Jesus was just a whole lot of no's. And yet when I read the words of Jesus, what I see is to follow Jesus is a whole lot of yeses. Just sometimes they're not necessarily the yeses I want to be embracing at that point. How many of us have walked into a room and seen someone sat on their own and gone, I just haven't got the energy to go and talk to them. That's what will set us apart, to love one another. Again, growing up in church, hearing all those no's, I'm almost positive it came across, and I'm not sure anyone said it, but I wonder if anyone else would relate to this, that this passage was simply saved for weddings. This is only a passage about weddings, was what was kind of interpreted. Because it wasn't ever really taught on. And the only time I ever really heard it was someone coming up and reading it at a wedding. And yet, when I bring it in line with the teaching of Jesus, I begin to understand this is a passage about how I should live every day of my life, with everybody, not just with Laura. What an incredible challenge that is laid before us. To be patient, to be kind, to trust, to hope, to protect. That's how people will know we are his followers, by the way that we choose to love one another. Again, what does a hurting, lonely world need? It needs to see love. And love lived out like this. The challenge, of course, is not to simply leave it here. Not just to be polite to one another on a Sunday morning, but to let it flow through our daily lives. To believe that what we have in here, the way that we do life in here, would have an incredible impact on the world out there if we let it flow through the doors and out through our lives Monday through Saturday. What an incredible statement that Jesus calls us to make by being loving. By being loving. And then we have that second passage. To the Jews who believed, Jesus said, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. As I took apart this passage, and I found it fascinating, there is not a huge amount of teaching on being a disciple. And as I kind of spent some time understanding that, it's because the understanding when this was written was how to be a disciple. You followed someone and you did what they did. That was the understanding of disciple when it was written. So there isn't a huge amount of teaching about it directly because it was a given. So we have to kind of take a step back and begin to understand what's going on here. So Jesus says this line, if you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. And as I looked at it, I found this amazing way of breaking it down. So if you hold on to the teachings of Jesus knowingly, by that I mean that we need to know them. We need to know them. The understanding that I've managed to draw from this is if someone said to me, Tim, do you know Welsh? I could answer yes. But if they asked me if I could write it, the answer would be no. Can I speak it? No. Can I understand it? No. But I do know Welsh, because I know it's a language. I know it's a language predominantly spoken in Wales and other parts of the world. I know it's a very difficult language, and some of the words in train stations are crazy long. So I know it, but I don't know it. And sometimes we can find ourselves in this place. Sometimes we can know a lot about Jesus and about the way he calls us to live our lives, but we don't necessarily know it lived out. Any of you who have spent any time around Mark would have heard him use this. It's that transition of knowing it in our heads to knowing it in our hearts. Not simply knowing about Jesus, but knowing Jesus. Not simply knowing what Jesus said for us to do, but doing as Jesus said for us to do. It's crucial. And as I talked about with the roots, that understanding of those subtle disciplines, it is crucial we spend time in Scripture. It's crucial that we learn, that we know who God is, we know what Jesus did, we know what that says about who we are. But it can't end there. It can't end there. But it must begin there. We must know who we are following. We must know what we are called to as we choose to follow. Secondly, we hold on to the teachings of Jesus emotively. And this is that moment that I was talking about where we find ourselves at the barrier. We know it. We've read it. We've studied it. We understand it. As Francis Chan said, we can say it in multiple languages. But now it needs to mean more. It's that moment where it moves from just knowing it to living it out in my life. As I said, as Mark would talk about, from head to heart knowledge, this is it transitioning into the outworking of who I am. Who I am. All that I know is now having an impact on the way that I live my life. All that I know is now having an effect when the troubles come. All that I know is now having an effect when I meet with my friends. All that I know is now impacting how I face that reality. To live it out emotively, to let it be part of who I am. To understand that this isn't an exam, it isn't an interview. There is no divine score sheet that Jesus is keeping. It is about relationship with him. And we need to know who he is. And we need to know what he calls us to. But we also need to do it. We need to live it out in our daily lives. And that leads us to our third, holding to his teaching. Responsively. We need to live it responsively. And this is where I've struggled in my own faith. Because some bits of the Christian faith are awesome. And you get to go and do things, and you get to be a part of things, and you get to sing some songs, and you get to drink copious amounts of coffee at people's houses, and there's these amazing bits. And then we get to the point where it becomes a challenge, where Jesus says outrageous things like, love your enemy. I have to get to the point where I am living out all of this. And my response to all that I know and all that I feel and everything that flows is that I do it. In no way is this an advertising pitch for Nike, but that whole slogan of just do it is incredible. And I wonder if there were points when Jesus wanted to say to the 12 in front of him, just do it. Trust me when I say you are capable. Trust me when I say there is another way of being. Just do it. I wonder what it is that stops you from this point. I wonder what the barrier is that stops you stepping beyond and understanding that there is a call on our lives to follow Jesus, to see the fullness of life that he promises to us. This call to action is the one we feel most comfortable to leave by the wayside. Some of you would have heard this in various ways, but C.S. Lewis wrote this in Mere Christianity. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I do not accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic, on the level with the man who says he is a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool. You can spare him and you can kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about him being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he did not intend to. If we take those words of C.S. Lewis seriously, it leaves us at a point where we have to make a decision. Either Jesus is who he said he was, and we've chosen to follow him, and therefore we need to live out the commands that he laid for us, or we walk away. Jesus never left us with a grey area, never left us with a dilemma. It is either all true or none of it is true. He meant everything he said, or he meant nothing that he said. That's the choice we have to make. And that means when I read passages that tell me the way that I love you is how the world will know I am his disciple, it is not a choice that I get to make. Either I follow Jesus and I love, or I begin to reject his teaching. We have to make a choice, and it has to mean more than just knowing lots, and it has to have an effect on the world around us. If Jesus is who he said he was, who he said he is, which I believe to be true, and if Jesus calls us to follow him, being who he said he was and who he said he is, which I believe he does and I believe he is, then I need to be not simply a person of great faith, but a person of great action. To believe everything Jesus said does not leave us being just great people of faith, but leaves us needing to be people of great action. To live out our walk with Jesus. I'm going to bring this message to a close, and it is inevitably part of a bigger series and discussion for us to journey as a fellowship. But we need to understand that call that Jesus places on us. And I want to leave you with this challenge. The challenge that we began with today. A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another.